Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Before we begin today's webinar, Osteoporosis Canada acknowledges the land that our offices, located in Toronto, are on, is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. My name is Tracie Napoli, Director of Fund Development and MARCOM at Osteoporosis Canada, and I will be your cooking demo host today. Welcome to everyone who has registered and who is watching via Zoom, and to those also watching the live stream on Osteoporosis Canada's Facebook page. We would like to thank Danone Canada and Oikos Greek yogurt for their partnership on this cooking demo. This webinar will provide general information about cooking and food knowledge. It is not intended as individualized health or nutrition advice. If you have questions about nutrition, consult a physician or registered dietitian. Now, if you have questions during the webinar, and if you're watching on Zoom, you can easily enter your questions by clicking the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Or if you're watching via Facebook, just enter your question in the comments section. We will do our best to answer as many questions as we can during the webinar within the time available. Today's cooking demo is the first in our new series, as Osteoporosis Canada works to provide strategies, new ideas, and recipes to help you get the bone-building nutrients needed for bone health. Nutrition is a key component for strengthening and maintaining healthy bones, as well as in the prevention and management of osteoporosis. Calcium, vitamin D, and protein are essential nutrients for proper bone health. Do you know how much calcium and vitamin D you need daily? Check out Osteoporosis Canada's recommendations based on your age. You can also find this chart on the Osteoporosis Canada website. When calculating the calcium from food sources, always read the product label when possible. For products like yogurt, the calcium listed will differ based on the serving size and the type of yogurt. For example, we are using Oikos Greek yogurt in today's recipe, and the amount of calcium listed is 175 milligrams, which is based on a 3/4 cup serving. It's time to get cooking. Today's featured recipe is a flavorful springtime dish, Roasted Veggie Cobbler, which has 19 grams of protein and 250 milligrams of calcium per serving. You can find today's featured recipe along with others by visiting osteoporosis.ca/recipes. I will put the link to the recipe in the chat once we begin the cooking demo. It's now my pleasure to welcome Emily Richards, a professional home economist, freelance food writer, chef, and she is the author and co-author of 10 cookbooks. Emily also writes and develops recipes for print and online publications that include everyday cooking and healthy eating. And she can be found on TV, radio, and webcasts just like this one. Please welcome Emily.
Thanks, Tracie. Hey, everybody. I'm so happy to be here today. It's raining. So it's a good time to be inside doing a webinar, Tracie, don't you think?
Absolutely. It's if you're in the GTA in Ontario, it's kind of a cloudy day. We know we've got some friends, in Manitoba, and it's kind of snowing. I'm not sure what the weather is like where you are, but this is a beautiful springtime dish. And just before Emily starts, we want to let everyone know that if you're on at the end of the webinar, we're doing a giveaway for an unbreakable apron, and we'll list the winner. Emily's got her fabulous apron on, and you can get one as well. So Emily, take it away.
Thank you. So we are making a fabulous roasted veggie cobbler today. And you may think of cobbler right away and think, should that be dessert? Well, I've kind of taken the elements of that dessert and made it savory and made it springtime too, which I think is fabulous because it just gives us the opportunity to kind of celebrate what season we're in and the vegetables that you will find in the grocery store and soon at the market locally, which is fabulous. We're actually going to start off with our vegetables because as I do pretty much all the time, when there's a recipe with a few components, I like to take it apart so that you can kind of see everything being built on itself and then have it all come together. And it really helps break down the recipe and make it easy. I know sometimes when you look at an ingredient list, you think, oh my gosh, it is so long, too many ingredients, what am I gonna do? It's actually just kind of breaking it apart. And that's what we're gonna do as we work through the recipe. So I'm going to start off with the vegetables, and I'm using kind of similar textured vegetables because they roast really nicely together. So the first one, is mushrooms, and I'm just using white button mushrooms. They could be cremini mushrooms, they could be other types of mushrooms, but I really wanted the button mushrooms for the texture here so that they kind of cooked at the same rate as the other vegetables. Not slicing them today, I'm actually just quartering them. So just in quarters, and they're going to go into this large bowl. I left a couple for me to do just to kind of show you how simple it is. And this is just one container of mushrooms. And if you have a mix of mushrooms, let's say you have a few different kinds, you can just mix them together. In total, we need about 8 ounces, so about 227 grams. Next is red pepper. So this is just a bell pepper that I've chopped up. Everything's chopped as well in similar size pieces so that it roasts at the same rate. This could be yellow, orange, green, whatever type of pepper that you want to get rid of because it's been in the crisper too long. That's what you're going to use. And again, locally, we have local mushrooms that are produced across the country, as well as greenhouse peppers. So it's really wonderful to think of spring and think of all the wonderful vegetables that come out during springtime. However, sometimes they're not, we think that they might not be local, but you have to remember there's lots of great greenhouses in the areas that really help support this, which I think is awesome. Zucchini. Now, I know you may be thinking sooner than later, you're going to have a garden full of zucchini. So think ahead because this recipe will definitely come into play. This is just one small zucchini that I've chopped up. Okay. And we can't mention spring without pretty much, I think, everybody's favorite vegetable, asparagus. Okay. So we need 2 cups of chopped asparagus, and we're not pre-cooking it. It's going in raw because we are going to be roasting it. So what I want to do is just trim the butt ends here. And typically those are the more tough ends of the asparagus. And what happens there is if you're roasting them, they will still become tender, but I just like to trim them a little bit to kind of freshen them up. So just kind of take that, it's about 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch right off the bottom. And if you have a stock bag or other vegetables that you like to keep for flavoring or roasting along with meats, these asparagus butts will definitely come into play. The tips are the other end, just so you know, there's a difference. And then we're going to chop them again, about the same size as everything else. What I do like to do, because these asparagus tips are always so beautiful, I leave them just a little bit larger so that they're a little bit more visible in the dish. Okay, so those are going to go in. And I did, that's not 2 cups. There's the rest of the asparagus. Okay. Now, spring brings spring onions, so also known as green onions. And if you've ever cooked any American recipes, they're scallions. So green onions is what is going to go in. It just adds a really nice soft onion flavor to all the vegetables. So again, I'm just going to trim off the ends. And oftentimes you will see green onions called for in a recipe to use just the whites, light greens, or the greens. We're using the whole thing. I'm all about using it all up. So that's what we're going to do. But we are going to just chop these up. Okay. I'm just going to give them a little chop. And if you didn't have green onion, I know my chives have already started to come up in the garden. That would be a lovely addition here that you could add. Or even just a small onion would work, just to kind of give it a nice little bit of flavor. Okay, so that's a lot of veggies. I know what you're thinking, but this is a main course. So you need those vegetables to kind of bulk everything up and provide lots of flavor. We're going to use a fresh herb. We're going to use some fresh thyme. Okay, just because it calls for fresh thyme doesn't mean that you need to use fresh thyme. You can actually just use a substitute of dried thyme. Okay, so I'm using 2 teaspoons of fresh thyme. And if you only have dried thyme, great pantry staple, just a teaspoon is all you need. Okay, so that's a great little substitute. I use dried thyme often because I don't always have fresh thyme. So it's great to have on hand, especially with vegetables. It's a great marriage. All right, so we're also going to add a little bit of salt and pepper. And in the recipe, if you've taken a look at it, it says half a teaspoon of salt and pepper in the beginning part. And then it says divided, and you'll see that a couple times in the recipe. Sometimes I know that can cause a little bit of confusion, but all it means is that you're separating out the salt and pepper to use in 2 spots. So instead of calling for salt and pepper multiple times, it says divided. So guess what that means? That means you have to read the method before you start kind of working through. And as you notice, I have all my ingredients out on the counter at room temperature, ready to kind of bring together. And that not only helps things come together nicely and quickly, it also ensures that I have all the ingredients. Now, Tracie can attest to this. I have been known to forget ingredients that I have to go get, but hopefully today that won't happen. So we are going to add a couple tablespoons of, I'm just using a neutral oil. You can use whatever you have at home to roast the vegetables in, okay? So just a couple tablespoons like that. And then I'm gonna toss these. So far, so easy, right? I'm hoping so. Tracie, are there any questions?
Yes, Emily, we actually have quite a few questions today. So
great.
If let's say, let me say this first. When you start substituting things, and Emily and I are all about trying to make it as easy as possible, if there are things that you would like to substitute out. So the first one is the vegetables. So if you're not a fan of any of the vegetables that are in the recipe, what could you do? And does it change anything in terms of consistency and whatnot? So if you don't want to use asparagus or mushrooms or onions, what could you suggest?
Well, Tracie, I'm going to suggest that I just make the recipe for them and make them understand that it tastes delicious as is. No, I'm kidding. I would love to make this recipe for everyone. Unfortunately, I can't, but there's lots of substitutes when it comes to vegetables. Now, I did mention right off the top, the texture of the vegetables is very important. So these are all kind of similar textured, they cook at the same rate. So if you think about other vegetables outside of that, eggplant would be another one. Asian eggplant is fabulous for this. Other types of hard vegetables like carrots, for example, would be a little too hard. But you know what would work here is mini potatoes, those lovely little baby potatoes. You would have to quarter them and they would be a great replacement for mushrooms. You know how I know? Because I tried. But for a spring dish, I felt it was a little bit heavy, but you could definitely use potatoes in place of the mushrooms. You could double up on the pepper, leave out the zucchini, and kind of play around and have fun. In the end, this is it's almost 8 cups of vegetables that I've chopped up. So in total, that's kind of what you're looking for, because as it goes into the oven, which you'll need, I'm just going to pull out my baking sheet with parchment paper, okay? It's going to get roasted. So I already have my oven at 425 degrees. It's nice and hot. It's preheated so that when these vegetables go in, they're going to be in there for about 30 minutes. Now, it may seem like a long time to roast these types of vegetables, but these are also vegetables that contain a lot of water in them. And we want that water to evaporate so that the vegetables build flavor and pick up a nice little bit of color. The potatoes will do that. The eggplant will do that as well. So you can kind of play around in that respect, and any pepper will do that. If you want to spice it up, you could easily add a hot pepper to this too. A jalapeno would be really nice. And you could just add that in addition to these types of vegetables. Now, if you're thinking other vegetables like peas, for example, those I wouldn't roast, but I would certainly add some of those before we move on to the next part of the recipe, which is the custard that we're going to be making. Does that help, Tracie? What do you think? Does that give enough substitutions without guilt?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I think so. And not like we're your moms, but we will say try it. Try it at least once, and maybe you'll like it. But also, you may have other things you want to try, and for your taste, it works. So
the other thing I want to point out is broccoli and cauliflower would work really nicely here too.
Yes.
I don't often mention those as substitutes for this because they do have a stronger flavor, but once they're roasted, they soften and they have a really nice texture and flavor. So raw, they definitely wouldn't work, but roasted, they would work here. So for those that are broccoli haters, this might turn you to a new leaf if you roast it.
Actually, Emily, someone just asked, can you use squash?
Oh, squash would be fabulous. And I would use the squash, like a sweeter style squash. So butternut squash would work well. If I wouldn't, pumpkin is kind of here or there in the squash family, but I think the flavor might be just a little too strong, but the sweeter squash, a delicata, would work really nice. Make sure when you're chopping it, it will cook in 30 minutes, but don't leave kind of really big chopping chunks, like not a coarse chop. So a little bit smaller, maybe about 1/2-inch pieces would be good, so that you can ensure that it's cooked and the moisture's not completely gone from it, but a lot of it's evaporated so that it doesn't come out in the custard. So squash is a great idea. I love that. And I actually love squash and mushrooms. I know that may sound weird, but it's actually a really nice combination. And that would, to me, make it think of a little bit more of a fall dish. So, you know, if you want this to be a seasonless dish, you could definitely rotate through the seasons and use what's available for sure. All right, so I'm just spreading out the vegetables in as kind of a single layer as possible. And then I'm gonna pop these into the oven, okay? So I have my 425-degree oven. I'm just gonna pop it in, and I am gonna put my timer on. Now, the good part is you don't have to wait for 30 minutes. I've done the work for you so that I can show you what it looks like after 30 minutes, okay? So I'm gonna bring my pan of roasted veggies out here to show you. So they've shrunk, what they do when the water evaporates, and they have a nice little bit of golden color to them as well. The bonus here is that this step can be done ahead of time, okay? So if you only have time to roast off vegetables tonight, roast them off. If you're not gonna make the cobbler tomorrow, that's okay too. You can make it on the weekend because today's Thursday. And these vegetables will be fine in the refrigerator. You can also freeze them if you wanted to. Just as an aside, outside of this recipe, roasted vegetables frozen are so handy to have on hand as a side dish. Add them to pasta or rice, or if you're building a savory bowl with some rice and you just want some veggies on top, it's a great addition to have. So it's kind of like a little surprise for yourself when you tuck these things in the freezer or in the fridge and add them to other dishes. So this is all good to go. And you do want to let it cool slightly before you move on to the custard. So I keep mentioning this custard. And if you're thinking, Emily, are we going to the stove? What are we doing? We're not. We're making one of the simplest custards, I think, because we don't have to cook it. So a custard, sometimes you may think of eggs and milk and flour and those types of things. But here we have yogurt that's playing a major role in this recipe as part of the custard, and then we're going to use it in the topping as well. So it really helps build that nice, if you've had an egg dish or a brunch dish that, you know, when you put your fork into it, has that nice custardy feel as you break into it, and it's nice and moist in your mouth. That's what the yogurt's actually going to do and help us with today. So I'm not going to dirty another bowl because I have to do the dishes. There's no one here to do the dishes. I am going to use the same bowl that my veggies are in. Another bonus of making vegetarian meals is you don't have to worry about having raw protein around. So I'm using the same bowl to reduce some dishes for myself. We are using eggs in our custard. So that's kind of the other key player in our custard. And this is where our yogurt comes in, okay? So we need 1 cup of plain Greek yogurt. And this is one where I'm gonna measure it out because I think this is very useful for everybody who loves baking with yogurt or cooking with yogurt. And if you have a liquid measuring cup, so those glass measuring cups with a spout, and you try to measure yogurt in there, it's very difficult. And it's actually improper. This is the home economist in me coming out now. I'm gonna give you a little home economic lesson. Because the yogurt is nice and thick, I don't know if you can see in there, I've already used some because I've been, you know, working away. It's nice and thick. I love using Greek yogurt. I love just having it in the house because, you know, as a snack, it's fabulous. But in our case, this is going to create that nice custard that we want our vegetables to cook in. So I'm measuring it in a dry nesting measuring cup. So you can see how beautiful it scoops out. See how it sits on the spatula? This is a good sign of when to use your dry measuring cups, because I can actually measure it and level it off completely, okay? So if you were doing something in the baking realm, let's say you were making a yogurt bread or a yogurt loaf, and it called for 1 cup of yogurt, this is considered a liquid ingredient. So even though it's not liquid and we're not using a liquid measuring cup, if you added it to your baked goods and you didn't measure it properly, it could offset the balance of your baked good. So in our case, it's not detrimental, but we do need a cup of yogurt. So this is the correct way to measure it, okay? So I know that I have an exact 1 cup of yogurt. Now I'm using the 2% plain Greek yogurt. And I've made this cobbler many times because I love it. It's absolutely delicious and it's really easy to make. Trust me, when you're making it at home, I won't be talking to you the whole time and it'll happen really quickly. But I've tried it with a few other different Greek yogurts, always plain, but I tried it with a higher protein yogurt, which I don't know for those of you that know, there is one available. And you saw that this has great protein in it. I think it was 19 grams. Tracie, you'll correct me if I'm wrong on that one. But it is a great protein dish, but that's calculated with our 2% yogurt. The high protein yogurt has 19 grams of protein in it. So it would bump that up if we used it. And if you're thinking, well, Emily, you just said you used 2%, this one is 0%. There's a huge difference. And Tracie and I actually talked about it a little bit earlier. And I don't know if this is a good time to talk about it, Tracie. I'm just going to wash my hands. Or if we should wait a bit. I'm making the custard right now.
You know what? Sounds great. I'm actually just looking up, somebody had a question on the amount of calcium because we list the recipe at 4 to 6 servings. So I'm just going to look that up quickly and I will confirm with you how much the 250 milligrams is.
Oh, perfect. So I'm just going to add, while Tracie's doing that, I'm going to add my eggs to the yogurt. So I'm using 3 large eggs. And this helps set the yogurt to create that creaminess. And it also, I think, just adds wonderful texture, but it also is additional protein that we're adding to our vegetarian dish. And then we're also going to season. So remember I said that salt and pepper divided. Here's where that other 1/4 teaspoon of salt and pepper goes. Okay, make sure you get that all in so that it works out really nicely. And then I'm just going to whisk this together. Okay. So this is our custard mixture. And you want to make sure that the eggs are nice and even throughout. There. So it's a nice unified mixture, just like that. And then this is where our vegetables go into. So I'm just going to, this is why I love parchment paper. I'm just going to take my parchment paper full of vegetables and put it right into my bowl. Okay, just like that. Make sure that we get all the goods in there. All right, and I'm going to move that away. And I'm going to bring over.
Emily, while you, oh, sorry, Emily, I was just going to answer. So the recipe, the 250 milligrams is based on 1/6 of the recipe. And you'll see when Emily does it, how very easy it is, that it is for per serving for 6, if you're making it for 6 people. So you can do that.
And it's always good to note those kind of ranges, because if you do have a bigger appetite, obviously, sometimes eating a vegetarian meal, you might feel a little bit more full on less, or you might be a little bit hungry. So it's always good to see those variations. So know that if you have a little bit more, you're bumping up the calcium and the protein by going to 4 servings as opposed to 6. So this is our vegetable and custard mixture. So I've just stirred it all together, and I have an 11x7 casserole dish. So this could be oval, rectangle, round, whatever you have works well. And the reason why I went with 11x7, you'll see when we go to portion it, it works out really, really well. So I'm just going to scrape this in here. I did lightly spray, just with some cooking spray, the pan so that I can take it out and serve it easily. Okay. So make sure you get everything out of the bowl, and then just spread out the vegetables nice and evenly. Okay, just like that. Now, we'll go back and talk about yogurt for a minute, Tracie, just because I did mention the percentages of fat, the higher protein, and those types of things. I'm going to set this here, and we're also going to move on to the next step, which is adding more yogurt. But when you're purchasing yogurt for baking or cooking, it varies in fat. As I said, one was 2% and one was 0%. And there's a difference in water. So depending on cooking or baking, the higher the percentage of milk fat, so that 2%, for example, which it can be higher than 2%, obviously, it adds a little bit more fat and richness to the dish, which helps it cook because then it doesn't evaporate as much. So the perfect example is this dish. Because there's eggs in with our yogurt mixture and the vegetables, as it bakes, if we used a 0% yogurt, Greek yogurt, what would happen is you might see a little bit of water. So we've kind of already taken out the water from the vegetables, and that's just a little bit of evaporation happening from the yogurt itself. So if you use the 2% yogurt, you start to diminish that, as well as higher percentages of yogurt. So I love talking about science and food. So I hope that doesn't confuse anyone. And Tracie will tell me, because she will say, yeah, that didn't make sense, Emily.
No, it did, because actually we did get a question. Somebody did ask if they could use 0% yogurt, 0% fat yogurt. So that is great. And then somebody else has asked if Oikos has a lactose-free yogurt. And yes, you can actually get on their website and you can look at all their products, but they do offer a lactose-free Greek yogurt. And just to let everybody know that when you do get, because this is being recorded, so when you get the replay email, there will actually be a link for a coupon for the yogurt. So you can go and try and make this delicious dish. So there you go.
Do I get one too? I want one.
Always, always. You're definitely on the list, always.
Yes, I love coupons. Don't tell anybody though.
Okay.
So I have the recipe right in front of me, by the way, which I talked about having everything out mise en place, ready at room temperature. You'll notice my yogurt was out too. It just comes together a little bit more easily because it was at room temperature. And by room temperature, I'm talking about that it's been out for about 15 minutes. Like before we got started, I pulled everything out of the refrigerator. I'm not talking hours here. So it just really helps bring everything together because everything's the same temperature. The other thing is I always like having the recipe in front of me. And if any of you have ever taken a cooking class with me or been to a webinar, you've noticed I tend to forget things sometimes. So having this in front of me really helps. And don't be shy, whether it's a piece of paper or it's on a tablet or a computer that you're looking at the recipe, it's just great to have on hand. And that's what I'm doing because we're starting the next section of the recipe, which is the topping, which is the cobbler part. So I guess I never really explained what a cobbler is, but many people recognize it as a dessert. Like one of my favorites is peach cobbler. My mom used to make it all the time. And it's just fabulous, fruit on the bottom in a sugary syrup and then dumplings on top, whether they're biscuits. Sometimes it's more like a cake topping and it's absolutely delicious. So I've taken kind of that theory and that technique and replaced it with savory ingredients. But the great thing about biscuit toppings is they can go sweet or savory. And that's exactly what we're making. That's what we're moving on to. Any other questions about the vegetables or the mixture, the custard, Tracie, before we move on to the topping?
Yes, we've had so many questions for this cooking demo.
Oh, great. I love questions.
Yes. So, but before I ask you the question about the vegetables, so somebody has asked about different measurements of some of the ingredients. So when, as Emily said, get your recipe and you read it, and what you'll notice is when there's more than one full component, the ingredients are broken up per component. So you're going to see the Oikos Greek yogurt listed twice, 1 cup for the mixture, the veggie mixture, and then 2/3 of a cup for the biscuit mixture. The same with the canola oil. We have it listed twice, and somebody was just asking about that. So yes, it is actually both amounts because it's for each component. Emily, do you have any comments on that?
I do. And that's one of the reasons, as I mentioned earlier, it's always good to read through the ingredient list, as well as the method to kind of see where it lies. And also, if you're missing anything, and I don't mean you necessarily, but sometimes recipes in the world of the interweb can get mixed up in translation from paper to computer. So sometimes if you think something is missing, just ask. It's always a really good idea. I get emails all the time when I post recipes and say, Emily, are you sure that this is right? And I go back and look and confirm that is it right, or did I miss something? It's human error, so sometimes that happens. In this case, one of the reasons why I love separating out recipes in webinars and cooking classes is because you can kind of see things develop on their own. And here's the example I'm going to give you. This custard and vegetable mixture that we just made, you can put this in the oven right now and bake it. Okay? Bake it off. Guess what? There's no gluten. There's nothing in here. Great dish with veggies and yogurt and eggs, and serve it up. Okay? So this is a recipe unto itself. Now we're introducing the second component, which is the yogurt biscuit topping, which is another recipe. So you'll see that separate title in the ingredient list. So now, if you take this apart, you have 3 recipes. You have the one that we're building, the roasted veggie cobbler. You have this lovely roasted veggie, what can we call this, Tracie? Yogurt bake. And then we have our yogurt biscuits, okay? And you'll see what I mean when we make the biscuits too, because you can bake those separately as well. So you can just like mix and match all you want. That's what I love about cooking and experimenting. And one of the reasons why I cook recipes so many times is because of that, so that I can play around with it and then share it with you. So I have here 3/4 cup of all-purpose flour. So I already know, I'm thinking in my mind, Tracie, there's people that are like, I need gluten-free, Emily. Can I use gluten-free flour? Yes, you can. Here you can use, I like to use just cup for cup, which is a 1-to-1. That's pretty much how they sell it right on the label, so that you can switch out all-purpose and gluten-free flours interchangeably, which works out really well, okay? So you can definitely use that here. Then we're also gonna add some cheese. Now, I love cheese. If you didn't love cheese as much as I do, you could leave this out, but it really adds a nice texture and flavor to the biscuits. So here's where you'll see that divided again in the recipe. It calls for 1 cup, but we're only putting half in the biscuits. So there's my half a cup. And this is just shredded Asiago. If you love cheddar, smoked Gouda is really good in this, because I didn't have Asiago one day and I'd used smoked Gouda. It was fabulous. Even some Parmesan. But make sure when you shred it, it's not the fine shred. It's this nice big regular shredded cheese that you're doing, okay? What cheese would you use, Tracie? What's your favorite cheese?
Sorry, you would think after 2 years I would get the mute and the video button all right. I was like, I turned myself off. But, and you know what? And so again, I'm going to go back to the whole substitution thing about the cheese. The cheese offers additional calcium and additional protein. So, you know, that's also why it's in the recipe, but also the sharper the cheese, the more flavor, right, Emily? So, I mean, if
right.
I don't know, I'm going to ask, I'm not a huge blue cheese fan, but like, Emily, would you use blue cheese in this, or is that like just way too much?
No, that's not too much. The only difference is I wouldn't use as much because it is a much more pungent cheese. Right. Asiago has a big flavor similar to Parmesan, not in the way it's made, but that kind of big, kind of salty flavor that carries through. Gouda, aged Gouda works that way. Aged cheddars work that way. But when it comes to blue, it's a little bit, kind of a little goes a long way. So you could even add about 1/3 of a cup to the biscuits and it's still going to have big flavor because it is such a big cheese. So definitely I would go blue all the way. That means I feel like I'm cheering for a team when I say go blue, but that's that's not what I mean.
Did the Leafs play last night? I don't know. Or the Blue Jays, where are we at right now? Okay, well that's great. And I'm going to toss you a couple of the last veggie questions just for now, because I know we are moving along. We have other questions.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I'm going to kind of give them to you all together. So sweet potatoes, great to use. How much did you cut off the asparagus? It does change, I guess, if you can answer that question. And then frozen vegetables. So if you wanted to use frozen squash or frozen broccoli, do you need to defrost them first, or can you throw them in frozen?
I love these questions. We should just have an afternoon of questions one day.
Should. Tracie. Oh my gosh,
that would be really fun. And then we still would have to cook something. So let's address the sweet potato first. Yes, because within that 30 minutes roasting time, the sweet potato would work beautifully. And guess what? Don't peel it. Same with the potatoes that I mentioned. Don't peel it. Just give them a good scrub and roast them. Again, it's about chopping it into the right size. So you're not making big chunks, you're not making wedges. It's kind of the smaller pieces that you saw when I took them out, or when I added them to the bowl. So definitely sweet potato would be fabulous. I want you to look at the amounts of things. So it's 8 ounces of mushrooms, 1 zucchini, which is about a cup, 1 pepper, which is about a cup, 2 cups of asparagus. So again, looking at the total amount of veggies that you can kind of mix and match in. Now, if you had a little extra in there, it's not going to be the end of the world. You'll just have less custard in your casserole. That's all, because it's encoding all the vegetables. Now, frozen vegetables, I use them often. They're a great economic way to incorporate vegetables into many meals, and they're always there, right? They're in the freezer, they don't go bad, they're not wilted and things like that. So I actually toss them with some oil, season them with a little salt and pepper. So same seasoning you could use as we've done here today. And then I roast them from frozen. Typically it takes a little bit longer because they have the excess moisture from being frozen, but why take the time to thaw it? Just stick it in the oven and let it do its work in there. So you're looking at not like a lot of time, maybe 5 to 10 minutes. And all you have to do is to test them is take it out and just give it a little squeeze. If you still see a lot of moisture in it, let it roast a little bit longer, but you will see the color change. And you can use those lovely mixes of frozen vegetables that have, I'm thinking of the one with broccoli, carrots, and cauliflower. Now, I know I said carrots were not going to work because they're harder, but frozen, they're softer, right? And they're sliced. So it's just those smaller pieces that when you roast them all together, they'll work really well. Because you don't want to bite into this and have like a really hard vegetable and then some soft vegetables. It's just kind of a little bit awkward. Was that all the questions about veggies, or did I miss one? I feel
no,
like that was
the asparagus, how much
the asparagus
cutting off at the end.
So as we approach asparagus season, it will be nice and tender because it's local, it's fresh, and that's no matter where you are. So just a little trim will do you. Now, if you're finding larger stalks of asparagus, sometimes near the end, they are a little bit more firm. So I usually, the most I have had to cut off of asparagus is about 1 inch, so 2.5 centimeters. Not a lot, but don't just get rid of them, save them, freeze them, because if you love asparagus like I do, and you just want to save all those ends, you can simmer them in some water or broth for, I would say it's going to take you a good 20 or 30 minutes to really soften them and make a lovely asparagus soup. Okay, so, and you could stick some carrot trimmings or anything else in there too and have a lovely soup. So just because you're trimming it off doesn't mean that you have to ditch it. It just means that you have to find some room in your freezer for it and use it later. Okay, so hopefully that addresses the asparagus as well. So I'm going to pop back to our biscuit topping, which has only our flour and 1/2 a cup of our Asiago cheese in here. And I didn't want the biscuits to be too boring. I wanted them to have a little bit more spring-like flavor. So I'm adding another herb. This is my standard go-to all the time, and that's parsley. Okay. This is flat leaf parsley. I always have it in my refrigerator. It lasts really well in the crisper. And it just adds that brightness to pretty much anything you add it. I'm also going to add a little bit of salt. And our leavener that we're using in our biscuit is some baking powder. Okay. And then just give that a stir. So I'm just using a spoon for this, just kind of stir it all together, make sure that it's nice and even. Okay, and it's not a lot. You'll see in the bowl, it's a minimal amount. But now we're going to add the rest of our yogurt. So we're adding more of that plain Greek yogurt. And we're also going to use some more oil. So this is, again, a neutral oil because I really want the flavor of the cheese and the veggies to shine through. So I'm using a neutral oil here. So here's my 2/3 cup of the Greek yogurt. Again, use what you used in the base because it just makes sense, unless you're kind of, finishing off different containers of yogurt. So here's my plain Greek yogurt going in. And what I'm going to do is whisk in my oil just to kind of get them together. And this is where, again, having things at room temperature really help come together nice and evenly. just like that. And then if you love garlic, by the way, you'll notice I haven't used any garlic today, but you could totally add garlic to the veggies and to the biscuits, okay? And then I'm just going to spoon my yogurt and oil mixture right into the flour and give it a stir, okay? Now, these are meant to be spoonable biscuits. You don't need to knead them. You don't need to kind of do anything with them. Oftentimes you'll see biscuits where you have to knead the dough, dump it out on your work surface, but these really just do stir together like that, okay? And then what I'm going to do in the bowl is kind of eyeball 6 dumplings or biscuits. Let's see, I only have 5 there, but they'll come together. And then you're just going to spoon them on top. Now you can make them perfect if you want and have perfect little rounds. I actually like when they look a little bit craggly on top. I'm sure that's not really a word, but I like making up words. So if we see it in the dictionary, we'll know it's a real word. So this is how you portion it after. So everyone gets their own biscuit. Isn't that fair? So that no one's kind of creeping in on somebody else's biscuit topping. There. So see how they sit nicely up on top? I just have a little bit more I'm going to add to this guy here. Okay. So this is why you can bake them on their own as well. So you can just spoon them onto a baking sheet. And if you want to bake them alongside, so that if you have those that need a gluten-free option and you don't want to make a gluten-free biscuit, you can just bake them alongside and they can still have the base of the recipe as opposed to having it topped, okay? And all I have to do now is sprinkle on the rest of that Asiago cheese, okay? So there's the remaining ½ cup that just goes over top, like so. Now, the one thing I didn't mention, which it's in the recipe, don't worry, I am not gonna leave you in the lurch. After you roast those vegetables for 30 minutes, you're going to reduce the oven temperature to 375, because if you baked this at 425, the top would scorch and then the custard wouldn't cook nice and evenly through, okay? So this goes back into a 375-degree oven for another ½ an hour. All right, any questions, Tracie?
Yes, we have such a good group today. All kinds of questions. So if you have questions about the recipe, the link is in the chat. You will also get the link sent to you in the replay. Somebody asked if when you heat or cook foods with calcium, if it actually affects the calcium, and the answer is no. You could eat or drink, let's say for milk, you could drink a cup of cold milk or a cup of hot milk, and it does not impact the amount of calcium that you would get. It's the same amount of calcium. The other question, that was for me actually, Emily, sorry. So there you go. You can kind of.
That's okay. I like to learn too.
Do what you would need to do. And then someone actually also asked if there's something that you also need to help with the absorption of calcium. And yes, vitamin D is what you do need. It is on the website. I encourage you to go to the osteoporosiscanada.ca website, find out how much vitamin D you need. It helps build stronger bones by increasing the absorption of calcium, and it also improves the function of muscles, which can improve your balance and decrease the likelihood of falling and suffering a fracture. So Osteoporosis Canada does recommend routine vitamin D supplementation for Canadians year-round. So more information on the website on that. 2 great questions. We have another question. So we have someone who said, I live on my own. 6 is too much for me. How could I do this just for one person so that I can enjoy this as well?
That's a great question. And I know there's smaller families that you still want to try recipes, and they may be obviously a little bit more servings than you need. And in this case, this recipe would work really well separated out into 6 single portions. So if you had small casserole dishes, so I'm thinking the little ramekins. So if I just put my hand here to show you, you have 6 beautiful little individual cobblers that you would bake off. Now, the timing is a little bit different. You're going to want to check them a little bit sooner because it's a smaller vessel. It's still going to be the same consistency, but it's a smaller vessel that has more edges around it. So it'll cook a little bit quicker. So instead of that 30-minute mark, you will be looking at least 15 minutes and then start checking it thereafter so that you know that the biscuits are cooked through. So they're going to have a nice golden brown top. By the way, this is the finished one that I pulled out. I'm not pointing to the raw one anymore. It has a nice golden brown top. And the other thing that you want to do, and this is key when you're baking custards, so you want the yogurt to be cooked and the egg. So you're just going to take a paring knife and insert it into the custard part, okay, and take it out. And you want this paring knife, first of all, to feel hot, but also to come out clean so that there's not any moisture or liquid stuck to it. If there is, just put it back in the oven and give it another 5 minutes. And then you can do the same thing and check it again. So this is really where you'll see a little bit more moisture happen if you use a lower fat yogurt. So, and that's, again, that's okay. What ends up happening is as it's cooling, it kind of goes back into the custard itself, but you might just see that little bit of moisture appear on the surface, but it's still going to taste delicious, which is, I think, the added bonus of everything.
That's great. No, that's super. And so, but sorry, and you know what? Did we talk about the individual servings, Emily?
Yes, just cooking them individually in a smaller casserole dish.
Great.
And then, and the other thing that you can do is freeze it. So here's where, again, using that higher fat yogurt, 2% or higher, really benefits you if you want to freeze something, because you can have the protection of that little bit of additional fat in the yogurt. Here we have a little bit of cheese helping as well as the eggs, so that you can freeze the rest of those portions and then take them out. This would make a lovely lunch if you want to take it to the office and have a little green salad alongside. But this would be beautiful for lunch, brunch, dinner, and it really kind of carries over, especially if you have vegetarian family members. I feel like this is hearty enough that whether you're vegetarian or not, you're going to really enjoy this meal.
Absolutely. Now, I do want to point something out because a few people have made mention. The original link to the recipe that was sent out yesterday was missing an ingredient. So good on those folks who actually looked at it. We missed the oil in the biscuit. It has now been updated on the website. It is a 1/4 cup of oil. So if you just go back to the link, you will actually find the complete recipe listed on the website. So thank you to the person who pointed that out to me. Let's just look here. So Emily, yes, Cragley is a word. Somebody looked that up for us.
Yes.
So thank you, Karen. Karen looked that up for us. That is in fact a word. Let's just see here. Let's see, we've answered the gluten free, the freezer friendly. We love things we can freeze. This is also, budget friendly, especially if you find, when the vegetables are in season, they're always more affordable. And I think people sometimes are nervous about dough. Do you find that, Emily? Like as soon as you hear biscuits or because we have another great recipe using Oikos Greek yogurt, which was the garlic rapini pizza, white pizza that we did last year. And again, it was like making pizza dough with just the yogurt, no yeast. And people found it was so easy. This is just as easy. This is easier, I think.
This is definitely easier because really all you're doing is stirring it and dropping it. So for those of you that love making biscuits, it's referred to as a drop biscuit, where you don't have to knead it and shape it. You literally are doing exactly what I did, stir it and then drop it. So you can do it by the spoonful. You can take the time to, bring it together, but there really is no need. And you really want to benefit from not overworking the dough. Let the yogurt create that texture. Let the flour just kind of relax and come together, and the cheese will melt in there, and you end up with a lovely textured biscuit. So it is technically easier. And the reason why the pizza dough works out so well is because you don't have to knead it too long. You really are just bringing it together and patting it out. Sometimes when you think of building texture in doughs, typically with yeast doughs, you need to work with it a little bit more. So that's where people can get a little bit frustrated. But here we're kind of trying to make it easy for you so that you can enjoy a meal. This does take because of the baking and time, it takes about an hour, but you can take the components apart and make them ahead. Like roasting off the vegetables, you've reduced the time by half already. And if you wanted to make the biscuits on their own, you could do the same thing. So it really is kind of, again, looking at the overall process of the recipe or method of the recipe and seeing how it works for you. By the way, we talked about freezing individually, but you could freeze this as well. If you wanted to bake it as is and then just cut it into portions, if you're a family of two, a household of two, you could just cut it and now you have 3 lunches ready to go so that you can take it out of the freezer. I like to thaw things in the refrigerator overnight before I warm them up. You can just pop it in the microwave from frozen, but it does benefit from being in the oven warming through so that it removes some of the moisture from being frozen, which is really nice.
Great. And I think we only have time for a couple of more questions. Sorry, I've just lost it here. So somebody has actually asked if you could plate it. Yes, not only will Emily plate it, she's also going to taste it for us. But if somebody wanted to add like a bit more, a little bit more to the custard mixture, and they wanted to add maybe some chopped ham or some even leftover shredded chicken, or, you know, what do you think?
That would be great. And here for the portion sizes, you could go up to, you know, 1.5 cups or 2 of, you know, chopped ham, shredded turkey or chicken. You could use some deli meat if you wanted, some little bit of thinly sliced beef or smoked turkey, anything like that would work really nicely in here. You could also just serve it alongside if you know, kind of wanted a little additional protein. And serve this more as your veggie and starch portion of the meal, just to kind of change it up a bit. So it's a little bit heartier. And if you want to extend it out. Now, if you wanted to do that, you could actually push this out to 8 servings and just make 8 smaller biscuits, so everyone gets a little portion. And if you're serving it as part of a brunch, that would be a great opportunity because you may have other things that you're serving, like some bacon or ham and those types of things. And you don't want people to miss out on this. So you can actually just make the biscuits a little bit smaller. So again, it's everyone gets a little bit of everything. Because if I didn't serve this as a 6, I wouldn't get that whole biscuit and I'd be really bummed out. And I know Tracie would be too, because I think she likes biscuits and cheese. So I'm just gonna scoop this out.
Who doesn't? That looks, now I love how that comes out because I don't think people thought it was gonna come out that clean. Like, maybe they
spray the pan,
right?
Yes, definitely. Having that little bit of cooking spray in there really helps. And the fact that the fat from the yogurt and the egg just kind of pulls away from it. So it is super easy to scoop out. So don't feel that you're going to be kind of, you know, scraping at the pan. And if you wanted to, you could serve this. You know, I hear kids all the time saying, but where's my ketchup with my eggs? If you really needed it, you could, but it really does stand up on its own as a dish, you know, as is, or as I said, with a salad or maybe some other more roasted veggies. You know, why not? Roasted asparagus alongside would be fabulous. I need a fork, Tracie.
You go ahead. And you know what, this is great. We have so many questions. Unfortunately, we can't get to all of them, but I think what I would suggest is, in terms of the vegetables to use, Emily's given us some great guidelines on the type, but again, we go back to your taste. If you want to add spinach, if you want to use, you know, more root vegetables, those are things that, you know, that's to your taste. And, you know, just maybe cook them a little bit longer. So as Emily said, they're not too crunchy. How is that, Emily? Because we're all going to have to vicariously through you taste.
It's horrible, and nobody should. And I'm kidding. Have you not seen? I've shoveled 3 forkfuls in my mouth already.
I'm always amazed at how such few ingredients can come together to make something so amazing and so delicious. And, you know, yogurt and flour and some vegetables and some cheese, and there you go. We've got this beautiful dish, which would be lovely for Mother's Day, which is coming up. How beautiful would that be? So as we go, let's take another shot of the beautiful cobbler. That is gorgeous. I'm going to, yes, look at that. That does look really good. Can you go ahead, Emily? I'm going to let the lucky winner of the apron know. So let's see here. Francie Fasano from North Vancouver, BC. Congratulations. I will email you and I will send you your unbreakable apron. So thank you so much for that. Emily, any last words of advice for the cobbler?
I can't think of any.
Make it?
I didn't make it, but I didn't mention other herbs. I talked about parsley, but basil, mint, even a little bit of dill, believe it or not, would be really nice in here. So, you know, as we approach more of the garden season and all those herbs popping up, this would be a great place to incorporate them and really kind of, as I said, carry it through the seasons and make it as hearty or not as hearty as you like, and share it because it is delicious, I promise you.
Well, that is great. I'm just going to quickly share my screen again. So if you would like more recipes, and we're really excited because we have just released online our next series of recipes, and this roasted veggie cobbler was the first one in the series. So you just need to go to osteoporosis.ca/recipes, and you can see them all there. If you are looking to calculate your calcium, we have the calcium calculator on the website. You can also access podcasts. We have great podcasts through your favorite streamer, or you can also do it through the website. We've got the Know Your Risk quiz. You can help educate people on their risk for osteoporosis. And this webinar will be sent to those registered, but will also be available on the OC Replay webpage within about 24 hours. Thank you to our partners, Danone Canada and Oikos Greek Yogurt, for helping us put this webinar together, and also for Emily, who always does such a fantastic job to get information directly to your inbox, because we do have new webinars coming up on a variety of topics, in addition to a lot of other new podcasts and information. Just hit subscribe at the top of the website, and that way you can get it to your inbox. So be sure to stay connected by subscribing to that national newsletter. You can also follow Osteoporosis Canada on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And until next time, thank you for joining us. Please continue to stay well and stay connected. Happy cooking, and take care, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.